Hey everybody, good afternoon. Let's talk today about the Dybbuks or the Dybbuks box. How many of you are familiar with this? Let's talk about the history of the Dybbuks box. Let's talk about the psychology. Let's talk about the witchcraft behind it and the insanity of it all. Let's talk about it. What prompted me to do this video in the first place was my daughter. My daughter's working on a case and a Dybbuks is involved. I'll leave it at that for now. If she gives me permission, maybe I'll talk in detail a little bit more about it because it's very interesting. But that got me to thinking, and then I put together this video to show you what a Dybbuks box is. Some call it magic. Then if you go back further in history, they call it different things. So let's talk about those different things. But before that, I wanted to share a little cipher of one I had wrote kind of on a whim last night. It's not that great, but I wanted to share anyway before we started. Okay. You could tell when I get nervous. Look. Okay, let me stop. Okay. Open the wine cabinet, release the Jinns and the spirits inside, unleashing the Dybbuks that resides inside. You open the box and you can no longer hide. Insanity rings its toll loud and clear, while you run out in terror and try to hide in fear. You cannot hide from the demons that reside inside. Hysteria, insanity, that mentality you try to hide. So that's my little cipher that I wrote, okay? I don't know if it's real good or not, but I'm kind of new at this, but that's what I wrote. So let's talk about the box. Let's read about the Dybbuks. So the blanket diagnosis of hysteria has been fragmented into different medical categories. They have different ones like epilepsy, personality disorder, DID, conversion disorder, dissociative disorders, and other mental conditions. A lot of MK Ultra there, as you can see, obviously. The word hysteria originates from the Greek word uterus. The oldest record of hysteria dates back to 1900 BC, when Egyptians recorded behavioral abnormalities in adult women on medical papyrus. The Egyptians attributed the behavioral disturbances to a wandering uterus, thus later dubbing the condition hysteria. To treat hysteria, Egyptian doctors would prescribe various medications. Examples, they'd put strong smelling substances on their patients' vulvas to encourage the uterus to return to its proper position. Another tactic was to smell or swallow unsavory herbs to encourage the uterus to flee back into the lower part of the woman's abdomen. The ancient Greeks, they accepted this explanation of hysteria, but they added a few things of their own. They added the inability to bear children or the failure to marry. Ancient Romans also attributed hysteria to the abnormality in the womb. However, they discarded the traditional explanation of a wandering uterus. Instead, they credited hysteria more to a disease of the womb, such as having miscarriages or menopause. Hysteria theories from the ancient Greeks, as well as the Egyptians and the Romans, were the basis for the Western understanding of hysteria. And between the 5th and the 13th centuries, increasing influence of Christianity in the Latin West altered medical and public understanding of hysteria. St. Augustine's writings suggested that humans suffered a result from sin. Thus, hysteria became perceived as satanic possession. With the shift in perception of hysteria came a shift in treatment options. Instead of admitting patients to a hospital, the church began treating patients through prayers and amulets and exorcisms. Furthermore, during the Renaissance period, many patients of hysteria were prosecuted as witches and underwent interrogations, torture, and even execution. However, during the 16th and the 17th century, activists and scholars worked on getting the definition changed back to a medical condition. And there was a French physicist named Charles Lapoise who insisted that hysteria was a malady of the brain. In addition, in 1697, English physician Thomas Sydenham, sorry if I butchered the name, theorized that hysteria was an emotional condition instead of a physical condition. Many physicians started following this belief system, and they believed that hysteria became disassociated with the soul and the womb. During the time period, science started to focalize hysteria in the central nervous system as doctors developed a greater understanding of the human nervous system. The neurological model of hysteria was created, which further propelled the conception of hysteria more as a mental disorder. In 1859, Paul Briquet defined hysteria as a chronic syndrome manifesting its many unexplained symptoms throughout the body's organ systems. What Briquet described became known as Briquet syndrome or somatization disorders, and that was in 1971. Over a 10-year period, Briquet conducted 430 cases in which patients who had hysteria. Following this, there's a whole lot. Do I want to read the whole dang thing? I don't. Basically, it says that there was a bunch of people who did a whole bunch of research on these people, and they studied a bunch of different types of hysteria, like anesthesia, amnesia, bulimia, motor control disorders, and character change in depth, and proposed that hysteria symptoms occurred due to a lapse in consciousness. Now, Freud theorized that hysteria actually stemmed from childhood sexual abuse and repressed memories. Now, Freud was also the first person to apply hysteria to men. During the 20th century, as psychiatry advanced in the West, anxiety, depression, and other diagnoses began to replace the hysteria diagnosis. For example, from 1949 to 1978, annual admissions of hysteria patients in England and Wales decreased by roughly 2/3. With the decrease in hysteria patients in Western cultures came an increase in anxiety and depression in patients. Although declining in the West, the Eastern countries such as Sudan, Egypt, and Lebanese hysteria diagnoses remained consistent. Theories for why hysteria diagnoses began to decline vary, but many historians infer that World War II, Westernization, and migration shifted Western mental health expectations. 20th century Western societies, expected depression and anxiety manifests itself more in post-World War II generations and displaced individuals, and thus individuals reported or diagnosed accordingly. In addition, the medical advancements explained ailments that were previously attributed to hysteria, such as epilepsy and infertility. Then, in 1980, after a gradual decline from the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that's a mouthful, DSM for short, which had included hysteria as a mental disorder from its second publication back in 1968. So, there's a little bit of history on what a Dybbuks is. Now, in witchcraft, they call it a disassociated spirit. It is supposedly a spirit that roams outside of bodies. It stakes out a person in advance and then enters them. See, that's why it's important that people are aware of the things going on around, because words and etymology are important. Your mental health is important. Your soul is important. So this is just a bit of a breakdown on what hysteria is and what it used to be and the spirits behind it.